Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show, our weekly show on Tuesday mornings at 8 o'clock. Glad to have you with us. Hope that you will take time to let us know where you joined from and also engage with us with thoughts and questions in the comments. And we look forward to you being a part. So, Anton, tell us a bit about what we're going to be talking about today.
Good morning, folks. Today our topic is, how leaders need to, the way for leaders to succeed is manage your turnover.
Mm.
It's a really close one to my heart because I used to be a recovery manager. Basically, I would take over underperforming teams that haven't been hitting, their goals, haven't been doing what they were supposed to be doing for really extended periods of time, and transforming them to better performance. And I would say there's number one thing that made me successful when I did this, and that's managing turnover. It's getting people to stay longer because it's a singular focus that I had, but it obviously had many other things that were underneath it. In order to make that happen, there were a few things that had to happen. So we'll talk about that. Just a quick article, as always, we'll cover here in a second. But I want to ask you the question, right? What do you think is important to managing turnover? What do leaders need to do in order to retain their employees better from the start to the finish of the employee life cycle? That's kind of what we call it. But yep, so secret to leadership success, turnover management. I mean, as I just mentioned, that's what's important. But can I pop it on the next slide? And instead of getting super deep into this, I came across this. I think this was written yesterday, filling the skills gaps with workers over 50. Kevin and I talk about ageism and things like that happen. And I think this is a great way to overcome both ageism and at the same time provide some of this tech skill gap, specifically what they were
Mm.
talking about. And many people are not retiring when people used to retire. People are working well past their 65 and then some even 70s. So why not teach them some of these new skills? Because they would be happy to step into some of these roles. Instead of working, I see so many older people working in grocery stores and just some of these jobs that like are not using their skills very well. And I think that this would be a great solution for both situations. What are your thoughts on that, Kev?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. In fact, a good friend of mine that we served together in the State Guard retired a few years ago and was um, a bit bored and decided that he wanted to work some, but he had an interesting perspective on it in that he said he was motivated because as a kid he'd always wanted to work at a grocery store. And so he actually is now working part time at a local grocery store and loving it. And it's a different way of approaching the skills gap because, in his case, having been an engineering type and all that, he wanted to be involved and engaged, and he liked working with people. And he says he's loving it. And so part of the skills gap that we've got to consider is that folks in that over 50 age bracket may want to do something very different and than what they did before, and consider moving forward. And definitely, filling the skills gap is another component of it. Is like you mentioned, the technology. I'm kind of an oddity in my peer group in that I'm very technical savvy and so on. But many of my peer group not only don't have the skills, some of them even have a bit of a dislike towards technology for a number of reasons. And so, working with that age group to help get comfortable and to learn how to use those technologies is very helpful. And one of the things, though, and that has to be considered, is your traditional IT folks coming in and and training people on technology, assuming a certain level of fluence in technical geek, is not good because much of the over 50 generation is not even acquainted with the terminology and so on. So yeah, it's a big challenge that we need to consider. Welcome,
Perspective.
Rosemary. Glad to have you this morning
Hey,
or
Rosemary.
evening your time.
It's one of those things that I think it's we have to expand. We got to get out of the box. Everybody says that, but when it comes down to finding new workers, IT and tech is not as hard as it used to be, right? Like there
Mm,
is so much software that's become so user friendly that there is a really untapped market over here, and I think that's great. But if you folks are just joining us, we're talking about managing turnover today. So Kev, you can pop that off. Um, but I want to ask you again, if you just joined, what do you think is important to managing turnover? How do we retain employees as leaders better? What kind of things do employees care about, right? So for me, I'm going to start out with some basics, right? It starts from let's start on the kind of the managerial side. What's more accepted usually, or what's more talked about, and it starts with hiring, right? It starts with proper hiring to find the right fit and a lot of transparency from the start. I think
hmm
that a lot of times people get brought on and they're kind of misled from the beginning, or they're overpromised and underdelivered, or we're just in a hurry because we're being reactive with turnover. We're trying to hit a waterline, and we're finding just kind of to plug holes, right? Instead of finding ideal
hmm
fits, we're just plugging holes. So I think that, in my opinion, that's one of the most important things, just from a very practical standpoint. If you want to manage your turnover better, hire better. What do you think about that, Kev?
Oh yeah, definitely. Uh, do a better job of understanding people coming in, and that's one of the reasons that I, in this process, dislike ATS because all it can do is evaluate keywords and checkboxes, and the better thing to do for any entry in to our workforce is to really understand who the people are. I continue to watch evidence that people's behaviors, their basic um, core person, is a better indicator of how they're going to succeed in jobs or whether they will succeed in jobs. And therefore, if that's the case, then we need to be finding out and understanding those parts of people as we bring them in. And and I think that we make an error in approaching the one size fits all kind of thing on self development and um, benefits and things of that nature. I think we've got to use a phrase that we coined several weeks back. I think we've got to be strategically flexible in our approach in bringing people in, and there has to be some parameters, and but explain those parameters, but don't get so locked into one way to do it and expect everybody to fall into place with it.
No, I love it. I mean, that's the ATS is it helps. I get it. Some large companies need to be able to sift through, large amounts of applicants, and I get it because, sometimes people apply anything they see without really considering
Mm-hmm.
if they're qualified for it. Some are maybe overqualified for it, but we keep talking about this hiring, or I mean, this talent shortage, right? And
Yeah.
I'm like, if we're really experiencing this talent shortage, we really got to stop just this automation and tossing people aside. But you mentioned knowing your people, and the next piece is onboarding, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's where so many people go wrong. That first 90-day process, it can sour people so poorly that they could be losing somebody 6 months to a year down the road because of the experience they had from the beginning. We all know those first impressions tend to stick, and you mentioned knowing your people. We in onboarding oftentimes spend trying to teach people what we want them to know about us,
Right.
what we would want them to know about the company. But where leaders can do better is spend more time getting to know them,
Mhm.
understanding them as quickly as you can, and not just from a proficiency and technical side, but from the human side. We've talked about a lot about leadership in the last few weeks, and it all boiled down to the foundation of leadership is relationships. And
Mm,
that has to start right out the gate. So when we talk about onboarding and Prospective Force, we talk about different types of onboarding. You have your technical onboarding, you have your administrative onboarding. Everybody kind of does that. Those are table stakes. But the other two is the ones that are most often left out. cultural onboarding and
Hmm.
social onboarding, right? Bring them into the culture, have them understand values of the company, vision of the company, inspire them to make a difference. But also don't forget the social onboarding. Don't forget to, bring these people in and introduce them to their peers, introduce them to, how things work, especially in this virtual environment. Social onboarding, I think, has never become more key than now, because it's hard for somebody just to go sit and then reach out into meetings and talk to people. So it's up to leaders to step in and say, we need to find ways to get people talking, find ways to, make that crossover to where it feels like they're still in the office and not feeling isolated and like a complete newbie for 6 months.
Yeah. Again, we just are missing the opportunities. And frankly, one of the other pieces that gets overlooked is from the effect of turnover. We talk about avoiding turnover, and one of the reasons for it is that our goal is to be an effective leader of a team, is to bring our team together and to develop them so that the team has a relationship with each other and with the leader. And every time you turn people over, you have changed the dynamic of your team. And depending on the situation, you may even have to start back over, rebuilding that team dynamic and being able to have a cohesive team. So, part of the rationale to avoid turnover is to for that very reason. Um, let's see. Rosemary has a comment. Says talent shortage is a load of absolute piffle. What we have is an oversupply of recruiters who actually have no idea what employers are looking for and are willing to train once. Okay, Rosemary, I appreciate that. I really do. You have put it right there on the table, and you are right. We have a problem that our system of bringing people in and using recruiters. Um, Again, they're a place for recruiters, and they're one of Anton and I's good friend is a recruiter, but there are a lot of them out there that are a product of the system that's broken, and therefore they don't even know how to effectively do what they need to because of they're just told you follow this little trail and that's how you recruit people. So I get it definitely, and a lot of frustration out there over this very topic. I
No,
do.
I appreciate the honesty. Hello, Ravi. How you doing from India? Folks, if you're just joining, let us know where you're joining from. We're talking about managing turnover kind of from a broad spectrum. And ultimately, one comment is managing turnover is first foremost on the leader. I forget the
Mm,
statistic I want to say, and these statistics slightly change, but over a third of employees leave due to a bad leader. They don't
mhm.
leave the job, they don't leave their team, they don't leave the company, they don't leave their customers. They leave the person that's in charge, that's leading them on a daily basis. So, just a comment out there that doesn't often get talked about. But as a leader, if you want to solve turnover, start working internally. Start working on yourself. We
Mm,
talked about leadership a lot. Servant leadership is key. If
yeah.
you don't possess servant leadership, and you're worried about your turnover, and you're sitting there going, well, it costs me this much to hire, this much to retain and develop. I mean, you're thinking about all that stuff. That's great. It's important. I'm gonna talk about that in a second. But if you're not starting within and going, am I the best leader for this team? Am I the best leader for this individual? And if the answer is no, go do some deep work.
Yeah. Well, and you're just from a purely financial standpoint, yeah, getting people in is expensive. So I find it ironic, though, some of these same leaders that complain about that, when it comes time to spend some money to develop their people, are going, oh, well, we can't afford that. And I say, okay, so you say you can't afford it, but somehow you can find the money to do the recruiting. That doesn't make sense at all. Maybe there needs to be a realignment of line items or something. But as long as we don't invest in our people and include professional personal development as part of it, we're going to continue to spend lots of money on recruiting and finding people. And that's, again, there's a disconnect there that people don't get that. And I see it across the board. in all kinds of companies, and it's really a challenge.
Yeah, and honestly, like I would say my success largely with managing turnover came from development. As a young, leader, I was probably not the greatest leader. Not probably, I know I wasn't the greatest leader. I had my flaws, and we keep talking. There's a lot of stuff that we talk about. I was like, oh wow, I wish I would have done that before. I wish I would have learned that before. So I know I was maybe like a B leader, maybe even a B minus. But what I always did is I poured development into my teams. I was nonstop, every opportunity, every meeting. It was planned. It was I could give them as much as I could for their time, whether it be a one-on-one or a team meeting. And they constantly sought me out to find out how to grow, how to improve. And I think that in a way I got lucky with that because what I did is I did what I did for myself, and it's not always applicable, but most people like development. I ask myself every 6 months, when I am with a certain company, I go, am I better today than I was 6 months ago?
Mm.
And if that answer is yes, and I look at the things that have improved, I feel good about the things that I've done. I feel good about where I'm at. When I left a career of 9 years, it's two back-to-back 6 month periods that I said, you know what? I have not grown. I've grown myself. I've grown outside of work. I've done things in work to improve myself. But when it comes down to company and what I was doing and where I was growing, all of a sudden I was going, there's a lot more opportunity all around me to grow more. I'm going to go do that instead. So I think that as leaders, try to put yourself in their situations and say, over the last 6 months, how much have I grown or helped grow each one of these individuals? And if you feel like you haven't, be prepared to lose them.
Well, and Rosemary makes a salient comment that a good leader should be able to step out of their team and know that the team will continue and not fall apart for the length of the time the leader will be away. And definitely, and that means developing your team and preparing them to step in, either formally, informally, role of leadership, and that takes time and effort to do that. And the value I watch, right now the big concern with frontline leaders with companies is burnout. And part of the contributor to that burnout is this feeling that they can never leave or get away or let down because the team will fall apart. And if the team will fall apart because you miss a day or take a vacation, wow, that is definitely a big problem. And it's generally around a lack of development of the people on the team. You haven't helped them grow into their skills and identify their potential as a new leader, because part of being an effective leader is to have a succession plan. When a wise leader, as soon as they move into that role, are automatically looking for the next person or way to replace themselves. That just should be a part of it.
A different spin on what we're saying right now. There's a lot of insecure leaders today.
Uh huh.
Just not secure in who they are, who haven't done internal work, like I said, and they feel that if I step away, my team does well and happens to do well, then I'm not needed. Well,
Mm,
guess what? You're not needed because if your team, you're not there because you're needed. You're there as a supporter. You're
mm,
there as a contributor to the team. You're not this king that's running around and directing everybody. And if you're doing that, yes, every time a leader steps away, it's going to fall apart. And it's the greatest compliment I ever received in my life. I had to think about it for a while because I was still a young and somewhat insecure leader at the time. And my, national boss came around and said, Anton, I've never seen a team do as well after a leader did than after you left this team. And at first I was like, wait, is that a bad thing? Like, what are you saying, man?
yeah,
I feel
is
like,
this a good thing or not?
yeah, I was like, you're just trying to get me out of the way. He's like, no, Anton, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you prepped them so well, you taught them so well
Mm,
that when the next person came in, they knew everything that you could give them. You poured so much into them. And when the next good leader came in, it created just a little bit of addition to them, but they already had everything already baked in that you were doing on a regular basis. And he's like, that's not typical. That's not usually what
mm.
happens. Usually there's a massive performance drop because leaders put everything on themselves and then they're burnt out. And it's because of that insecurity, in my opinion, that makes them feel like I have to have my name on everything. Otherwise, I'm not worthy.
Yeah, and Ravi makes a comment that goes along with this. Actually, I don't feel there's a talent shortage of servant leaders who will have the skill to attract, hold, retain talent. Indeed, the challenge is, and in fact, Anton shared the stat that more people leave over bad management, leadership, boss, however, whatever term you want to use, and the talent shortage is an inability for um, leadership to be able to assess and determine what talents out there and plug them into their company. And so, yeah, you're correct. And then Robbie goes on to say, number of available talents is increasing steadily as it was earlier because of digital transformation. There's increased demand, and that's where the challenge is for yeah, pseudo leaders, managers, Google, MS, Amazon, top one will never complain for talent scarcity. Um, yeah, if you again, if you lay the groundwork, if you develop teams and develop people, you're going to retain more. And in fact, what's going to happen is you're going to be known as the company to hire, to get employed with, and be very sought after, which means you start seeking more qualified people start seeking you out. So it's a it's a process that feeds on itself, and a lot of people still have this mentality, and unfortunately it goes back to my generation of you should just be grateful to have a job. And on some level that's true, but at the same time, that doesn't give us, those of us that are offering a job, the right to have a mindset and attitude of, well, we're doing you a favor. No, especially these days. And when you look at the cost of recruiting and all of that, you go, okay, we're not just doing you a favor, we're helping ourselves as well. It works both ways.
If you folks are just joining, we're talking about, employee retention right now. If you have any tips or how you've seen it done or what you think should be done, A, let us know where you're joining from, and B, give us a comment on what, think is a great way to retain employees. But yeah, I like that comment and putting it on the leader. It's really so true. I think the best employees or new hires, I should say, are referrals from your own employees, right? The people that already know the culture, they know the person that's coming in, and they know that it's going to fit because they
Mm,
obviously see both sides of the coin, and it's not flipping that coin and saying, oh, hopefully it's a good fit. If you're not getting a lot of internal referrals, should be a red flag. It should be a, raise your hand and start talking to your people and figuring out why. Why is it they're not recommending their peers and their friends coming to work for you?
well, and it just, again, let's get very pragmatic. A referral, internal referral from an employee is a whole lot cheaper than paying a recruiter and going through all of that process. So again, we go back to pragmatics of cost, and then if you do that kind of thing, you have more money to focus in on rewarding your current folks and spend money on development of current and new folks. I, I I shake my head because I think this is so logical. Why are we not doing something with this?
I'm there with you. I'm thinking in my head of like if I should say it, but I'll say it. And like, there's a lot of smart people that work in organizations, but I swear organizations sometimes are stupid. Like
Yeah.
just plain old stupid. I'm like, you're leaving so much money on the table by trying to pinch pennies where you could be investing that money in employee development, as you said, employee culture. That's the other thing, right? If you want to have great retention, and to Robbie's point, if you have great cultures like these top 1% have, you're not going to struggle. You're not going to worry about
Mhm.
your hiring costs and things like that because your retention is going to be so great. So reinvest that money. But what do? We think, well, once I get to my waterline, once I get to a bunch of these great employees, then I'm going to take some of that hiring money and put it into my team member development and culture. I'm like, wrong. Do that from the start and let that be, the thing that drives your retention and waterline numbers.
Yeah, we have an old saying: penny wise, dollar foolish. And that's what we see a lot of, people not understanding the priority. And part of it is there is a system in place that we think is still effective, and it hasn't been called out for the problem it is. And again, it goes back a lot to my generation and how we approached management, how we approached recruiting, um, and so on. Things have shifted greatly, and much of the culture and much of the philosophical view of how to do these things has not shifted. And that's a where one of our big breakdowns is these leader, managers, whatever title you prefer, are doing what they have been trained to do, and no one's stopped long enough. In fact, could argue that the leaders above them have not invested in developing them to a point that they even know it's not working. You know, they've been told and educated, this is the way you do it, and nobody said, you know, that might not work anymore. And that's again part of the problem that we're dealing with.
Got a
Rosemary,
comment? Yep, there you go.
yeah, Rosemary has a comment. Best way to retain employees, very simple. Good old fashioned respect. Yep. And she says that over many years, I've had many different reasons to employ people. I've never used a recruitment company. I prefer to sit over uh, coffee and chat to learn about the person and what their ambitions are. Cost of employment is a barrier I refuse to consider. You're so right. And what's nice about what you're talking about, Rosemary, is that we talked about it in the beginning that a key to effective leadership is relationship. Well, when you start the process of bringing people in on a relational level, you have set the right foundation rather than everything being automated and computerized and all that. And so, yes, you're right. And uh, and then getting over just purely looking at dollars and cents, and quibbling with someone coming on board over $100, $1,000, that keeps you from getting someone that could very well be the person that is best fit and culturally and every other way. But we have this range of money that we're offering, and they don't fit in that range, so we disqualify them, and that's really unwise. So,
And I don't blame all leaders out there, right? I also don't want to. It is on the leader ultimately because you as a leader control a lot, but leaders have leaders too, right? And unfortunately, like you mentioned, there's a lot of frontline leadership burnout. The expectations are super high, and the emphasis of where frontline manager time should be spent, I think, is wrong. I think that there's too much on the management side and not enough on the leadership side. And
mm,
Kevin, as you often say, lead, manage things but lead people, and the upper management is wanting too much of managing things. And it's
mhm,
that, I look at, this is a little bit of a segue, but like Warren Buffett keeps a lot of time in his calendar that's open
mm,
because he knows that that time is best used for him thinking and doing things. Well, leaders need to keep a lot of time in their calendar open for team stuff, for just
mhm,
being around, engaging, building those relationships as we're talking about. It's the non-quantifiable things. Warren Buffett can't sit there and go, based on this amount of hours, these are the ideas that I had. He just knows that in those blank times, he's going to get ideas that are going to drive the rest of his business, the rest of his, thing. So the same thing has to happen with upper management, and I have to realize those blank hours of managers just walking around the floor and engaging with employees, they're so vital. But I know so often they're coming around and go, well, why was this open? You could have done this report. You could have done this. No, it wasn't open. They were engaging with their team and they were leading.
yeah, and we even see that in the military. Your great leaders that are uh, heralded throughout history in the military, one of the elements that they had is they spent time with their soldiers, even down to the lowliest private. They were there. They were spending time with them and being present. It didn't mean they were necessarily meeting with everybody, but if you can't relate to somebody that all you know about them is a picture on the wall and a paragraph, and so getting out there, being a part, and that takes having the time to do it or making it a priority. We all have the same amount of time. It's a matter of how we prioritize it. And people like Warren Buffett, people that have seen how to be successful in leading, have identified and understand that time for themselves to really uh, step back. I mean, part of it is I watch leaders just spend all their time down in the weeds. And when it comes time and something blows up or something goes wrong, they're so focused in the weeds, they have no clue to gain perspective. And when you don't, as a leader, have that perspective, your people are going to become frightened and anxious because they're looking to you for that perspective. That's part of your job, if you will. And we
Folks, if you
just
just joined, I just see a bunch of people, jumped in. We're talking turnover and managing, how
mm,
to keep our employees around. If you have any comments, please feel free to jump in. If you want to pull up Robbie's
yeah,
comment, we got a good one there.
including your experiences. We want to hear about your
Yep.
experiences related to turnover, either on the leadership side or you've been one of those people you get in there and realize that it's not a good situation and you very quickly jump out of it. So let's see here. Okay. One simple tip: when mid senior level managers are talking to team members, they should personalize discussion as well. Mostly people think professional and personal life is a separate, but actually it's not the case. Emotions are at both cases, in both places. Yeah, we got to stop this whole life and work separation. It doesn't work. It never
Kevin,
has.
Kevin and I call this a congruence, right? It's not a
Mm,
work-life balance. It's a myth. We discuss this all the time, trying to think that a person has an equal amount of work, an equal amount of life, and we're going to keep this on a little teeter-totter that's perfectly even. It's not feasible. It's not going to happen. So how do we get them to live together? How do we get them to live in harmony and congruence? And even mentioning development, right? When we're talking about development, some people don't need professional development as much as they need life development. Offer them all sorts of development,
mm,
and that's kind of what we believe in a perspective force is sometimes we figure out where's the stress coming from. For example, stress, if you guys don't know, that's what the biggest thing we deal with here. We help tech companies to really get through stressful times and helping their employees do better. But it's not just their professional side. That's one of the three things. The other two are life and health. A lot of times people would love to have some investment into their health. Someone would love investment into their life. They're teaching them how to manage relationships, teaching them how to, build a legacy, teaching them how to, have financial freedom, all that kind of stuff. But companies are afraid, well, if I teach you how to have financial freedom, you don't need me anymore and you're going to leave. They're going to leave you anyway. If you're that kind of person, you project that kind of thing out there that if I overdevelop you, you're going to leave, they're going to leave you anyway.
well, and it again very pragmatic and simple percentages. We comment, and I realize it's an errant comment, but we have accepted it as true, is that we spend more time with our colleagues than we do our family. And I'm sitting here thinking and just doing some simple math. There's 24 hours in the day. Theoretically, we're at work 8 hours. There's 16 hours of life outside of that 8 hours, which is double that work time. So, we've got to get beyond that mindset that work is such a big part of our time. At best, theoretically, it's half of our waking time only, but it's only one third of our total time in a given period and needs to be kept in that priority and look for the congruence rather than balance. Because how do you balance one third to two thirds? Mathematically, it doesn't work. Let's see. Rosemary has a comment. I am a CEO, but I'm also a person who believes that things need to be done can be done by the person available. If that means I sweep the floor or empty a rubbish bin, so be it. Titles mean scant little to me. Anyone who believes that they are a manager and sit behind desks directing traffic find I am simply not interested in how hard they work. Yeah, it's hard to talk about that with a straight face. And welcome, Dr. Jesmond. Glad to have you with us, and enjoy having you. Hope that you can join in as we discuss turnover and dealing with the stress related to it and how to manage it better. And
The other one for me, Kevin, since we're talking about stress, is leaders need to take care of their own stress. I'm telling you, I've caused turnover on my teams because I was over indexed on performance. I was over indexed on doing stuff all the time, and I forgot to take care of myself. I was working in the health industry and I wasn't working out. I wasn't doing those things because I needed all the time in the world investing into somebody else, investing into my people. And it became to a point where I started to, you know, infuse bad energy, infuse my stress into other people without realizing it, until one of my bosses called me out and said, Anton, what's going on with you? Like, you are just
Mm,
on edge. You just don't seem like yourself. You used to be the biggest smile in the place, and now I don't even see you smiling anymore. I'm like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, what are you doing? I'm like, here's my schedule. It's like, well, where's your you time? Like,
yeah,
you're here 12 hours a day thinking you're giving everything you can to them, but you're pouring from an empty cup, right? This is a that saying that may be overused, but it's so true. As leaders, we have to fill our own cups. We have to, find inspiration, motivation, and all those things on a daily basis to show up, as I call on, right? Leader, you can't be off. When you're at work, you're on all the time because you're there to support your team. But so when do you find time to recharge? When do you find time to take care of your stress? And then if you want to manage your turnover well, you better be doing that.
yeah, because our stress as a leader has a larger impact because it affects the whole team. And when you live stressed as a leader, you become that almost caricature picture of the bad boss, because you're snapping at people and you're tired and you don't have time for them because you're so busy doing other things. So if you're not taking time for you, chances are you're not taking time for your people either. And so
Oh my
again,
God. Sorry, I just saw Dr. Jasmine comment. They work an average of 14 hours per day in Japan.
yeah,
Oh my
um,
goodness.
yeah. I don't know a lot about the Japanese culture, but I know it is a very stressful and driven culture for a lot of the people. And and Dr. Jasmine, how well is that working for Japan, outside of maybe having high production levels? How is it working in terms of the people there? Be curious to know firsthand on that
And
because
an interesting one for me there, Kev, is, okay, maybe they're hitting their production numbers, but do they know their potential? Do they know what they
yeah.
could be hitting if things were different? And that's not Japan, that's everywhere, right? And,
Hmm.
and it's just we don't understand that, like, okay, I've set these quotas, I've had these quotas for years, we're achieving them, but we don't realize that the world has shifted and we could be doing so much better if we just actually backed off, if we let people have some free time, we let them de-stress, we let leaders take care of themselves, all the different things that we talked about. But here's the thing with leadership stress and not recognizing it. It's not usually something that has a sharp contrast. It's not something that one day a leader wakes up and they're just burnt out, they're stressed out. It's like a slow drip, right? Me and Kevin talk about this all the time. Like, our stress capacity is like a bucket, and that bucket is meant to have water, which is stress. And it doesn't just, somebody doesn't just come in and pour a whole lot of it in. Sometimes it's slow little drips. And because the change is so gradual, without contrast, we don't notice until you somehow have a wake up call, and you look back and you go, wow, over the last 2 to 5 years, that bucket has been overflowing. And I didn't realize it because it just got used to being this new stressed out me. And I forgot what great, inspiring, motivational, and people caring me used to be. So it's a challenge leaders to constantly check in with yourself and find ways to assess that and see that contrast in reality versus just comparing to yesterday.
Yeah, and that's not a selfish act. I am very big on servant leadership and really identify the critical nature of it. But people think, oh, well, if I'm focusing on me at times, I'm being selfish. No, actually, you're not. It can get extreme and out of balance, but most people don't have that problem. Most people, in terms of a leader, I mean, qualify that, don't have the problem of uh, taking time for selfish reasons. They The issue is that they don't take time and they're not there for their folks. So let's see here. It was interesting. Dr. Jesmond answered some of to give perspective. I think it's real telling. She says that so tired, so here online. Glad that this can be a way to break away a bit and get that, and talks about it being around for a long time. Yeah, I understand it. This the errors we're living in from a cultural perspective in work has been entrenched for a very long time. And you sum it up very well. Quantity is important, not quality. And there has to be a balance. You know, you can't produce one great thing and make uh, keep the company afloat on one thing. But you, if all you're doing is quantity, eventually the quality problems catch up, and you're dealing with a different set of problems. Um, Rosemary talks about her rule is never to work on Sundays. Sundays is my time. I agree with that. There's a good precedent set for us a long time ago in that regard, that 1 day a week rest. I engage in things that interest me. I read books and I spend time as much as possible with my grandchildren. And it is just 12 hours of doing what feels good for me. And that's necessary. You know, some people say I do it once a month. I I don't think that's enough, frankly.
And
Again,
tying that comment back into turnover, right? Managing turnover and employee retention. Know what your people need. Your different people may need a different amount of time to recharge. They may need different things. Like some person may need a break, an hour, throughout the day, and really just let them go. Some people may need small little breaks. Some people need, a whole weekend off. Like who knows? But you need to understand what do your people need and how much you can ask from them before you start hitting their upper limit of stress, because at that point you get diminishing returns. And,
mm,
and to the point of, yeah, Dr. Sabina, Dr. Jasmine, sorry. Um, I think there was a study that said after between 40 under 40 hours is optimal. Between 40 and 55, you can still get some margin of, work improvement from people or some margin of performance. After 55 hours is diminishing returns. You're actually better off with less time than adding that extra time in. And many people don't understand that. I used to not understand it, and I burnt myself out doing it. And in the long run, it costs company diminishing returns.
well, and you know me, I'm into principles and design. And by design, we were created to have a day of rest. So, you know, that's about 12%, 13, no, 14% is supposed to be set aside for rest. So if we want something of a formula, it's not a magic formula, but if you want something of a formula, whether you get it a day at a time, a minute at a time, however works for you, target that 1 day equivalent. I don't think that's an accidental deal. I know, in fact, I know it's not. I know it's part of design and creation of who we are. Interesting comment further on what they're dealing with in the Japanese culture is that Dr. Jesmond says every Friday you'll be given a task, so your weekend spoiled even then. So it's, uh, I have to wonder how long that will sustain. I don't think it will sustain long. I mean, if you have enough people, it'll sustain longer. But at some point, it'll have such a major impact from a health, both mental and physical health, and many other ways that it'll crash in around us.
Cultural
Definitely.
norms are tough to break, and that's something that takes work. It takes a lot of awareness and consciousness from a large group of people to break away from this. I
Yeah.
think United States used to be there. It used to be similar where we had this busy culture of people, being busy and staying busy. And I think finally, when people's mental health started to crack, and people understood, the healthcare costs and even the fiscal side of all this, um, people started to go, you know what, being busy all the time is not the answer. And we're still coming out of that culture. We're not even close to where we should be. But I think it took a lot of folks raising their hand and saying, hey, this is not working. Like I can't be here. People start leaving. So some of these great companies started figuring it out. What happens? These great companies go against the cultural norm, and all of a sudden they started getting great results, right? And once that started happening, then these other companies are going, okay, maybe there's something to it. But it took a really large amount of folks standing up for it and making it happen. So I hope that happens around the world faster.
Welcome, Richard. Glad to have you. Richard's been with us before. Um, let's see, he makes comments. I think sometimes the value of stress is underestimated. It triggers the brain to act differently, to be sure, but it can be productive. Like many energies, it can be managed. Keyword managed. One of Anton and I deal with uh, uh, working through stress, but it's never eliminate stress. It's managing it well, and that is definitely key. Richard, good comment. And so uh, Dr. Jesmond goes on to comment one way she is helping her situation is remote. And now we're back to this consideration of strategic flexibility and how it needs to be a part of what we're doing. And, Anton, to your point about the seeing enough effect that it triggers people, part of this whole pandemic thing, whether you agree or disagree with the pieces around it and so on. If it's done nothing else, this has become a trigger to help us realize that there are issues that have gone unaddressed, and so it's really good in that regard. Hopefully, we will focus on dealing with the root of that as much as we are focused on the virus and everything related, because the part of the stress and that related pieces are going to impact more people than this virus ever will. And we got to wake up and get a hold of that.
And this is why we preach what we preach so much. We talk about stress more than anything on the show, and it's such a common thing that we discuss because me and Kev, spent some time in understanding this. I've studied stress. I mean, God, what, I'm 35 now, so really for the last maybe 20 years, in some capacity. I lost my dad at a really early age
Mm.
when he was, when I was only 8, and he was only 45, and he died from lymphoma. But I'm a firm believer, and you can do research on it. Lymphoma and stress are very connected. And he worked himself into the ground. He was the leader that gave everything he could to his people. He was, a mayor of my city, and he always did that. But what did that make him do? He came home and he was an angry guy. He didn't have time for his family. He drank a lot to kind of overcome the issues that he was having. And then he would get back on the horse the next morning, try to pour from that empty cup, and never realizing what could he have actually done? How effective could this great man, this great leader have been had he actually managed the stress properly? I think about that all the time. He moved mountains. I mean, he did. Gorbachev recognized him in his final address to the Union. He was a big deal in the Communist Party, not advocating for communism, people, just being clear on that. Um, not a fun thing to do. But, and then I always ask myself, what if that man just refilled his cup from time to time and took care of himself? How much more effective could he have been? But being stuck in that way of living, not having contrast of what's possible, and just shooting for getting good enough, killed him. And that's why it's so near and dear to my own heart.
Rosemary, understood. Thanks for being here for the bulk of the live, and get some good rest. I hope you have a great meeting in the morning, rested, ready to go. So thanks for making the effort. Really appreciate that. So again, Dr. Jesmond goes on to talk about some of the culture in Japan, and it's pretty remarkably sad. And unfortunate. And Ravi also says that he believes that's true in Singapore. So again, we're seeing areas where this is a challenge and an issue, and it's something we've got to address. And at some point, we're going to continue to see the result, and it's not going to be good.
You know where it's going in the right direction? Scandinavian countries. I feel
Mm,
like Scandinavian countries are figuring it out and they're realizing that time at work does not equate performance. Time in school does not equate
mm,
performance. In classes and things like that, they're actually backing off and they're realizing that happier people tend to equate to performance. Happier students tend to equate to better learning, and overall better lifestyles. And they're really trying to not work on this work-life congruence. And I'm hoping that there's more news coming out, more positive things coming out, and Japan hopefully listens and sees. You know, I was talking to, I know it's not necessarily retention related, but I was talking about, I think it's in Finland, their education system used to be like bottom of the barrel. And they cut back hours. I think they only went to like a 4 hour school day. They focused on kids playing, kids interacting, and things like that instead of just being in class. And they're some of the top in some of the top in the world now. And I think that we can do the same thing in professional world and realize this old system we've been using forever of, burning your people out and punching the clock. There's other things out there, and we just have to trust. We have to trust that by taking care of people, we're going to get returned back.
Definitely. And it's really remarkable that it's taking such negative outcomes to finally get attention to move forward. And you're talking about the school having a lot of experience with homeschooling with my own children. It's remarkable that the same level of or higher level of academic achievement can be sought or be accomplished in about 3 hours a day of formal time that schools spend all day. And part of that, and this is, Anton, I'll try not to go off the deep end talking about education here, but part of it is that by what we have done, we have locked up or jailed learning inside of education. The value of spending a portion time on academics, which is its necessary part, but what we've done is we've made it all about that, and so now all learning theoretically resides in the school building somewhere, and our children think, okay, well, I'm done learning, so I'm go play. Whereas if it's done well, children that play in a different environment are learning even when they play. And that's where we've got to get in order to have any chance at all.
But
And
bring that back to the employment. It's the same thing. People are
yeah,
people if they're 12 or if they're 50. It's we feel all this structured time is what's most important, but peer development happens, and it's the best form of development in my opinion. When does that usually happen? When people are just hanging out, they're talking, they're
mm,
discussing their work, they're discussing what went on. They're helping each other how to handle customers better. They're helping each other how to, advance technical skills, soft skills, whatever it may be. And those non-trusting, insecure leaders are the reason that doesn't happen, because they feel like every box has got to be filled, schedules all organized, and there's no empty time, because that productivity loss is going to make sure that we're not getting ahead. It's terrible.
welcome, Mary from Florida. Always good to hear from Mary. She's a good friend on LinkedIn and personally, she's a dear friend. So welcome, glad to have you, and thank you for your kind comment. Welcome, Gladys. Glad to have you. Hope that you will become one of our regulars as well. And she comments, sorry to hear about the loss of your father, Anton. Yes, we need to take a step back, reevaluate the way we work to hopefully achieve some sort of work-life balance for the sake of our mental and health well-being. We've got to get them in a proper perspective to each other, term that Anton and I have come to like in regards to that is congruence, because it's not like we turn one on and one off and vice versa. They have to work together. If they're not working together, that's what gets us where we are today. Um, Robbie makes another comment. Organizations should look coaching as a value stream in each and every unit, enterprise level, program level, and project level. Managers need to be coached heavily. Only motivational messages and talks may not help. I agree with you there, Robbie, that, yeah, motivational talks, that's all good. But having either someone inside the organization mentoring leaders and coaching them, or if needed, then this is where Anton and I and Prospective Force come in, is we can be that coach system for an organization, especially in the beginning, to help develop the right culture and get over the hump with it. and be able to then develop it into a self-sustaining culture that includes these parts. So
Well, think
just
about what we've been talking about, right? We've been talking about how busy leaders are and how team members are leaving because they don't have the relationship with their leader, they don't have the development from the leader, all those things. It's not that easy to open up leadership time, but it
mm,
is easy to buy some time and outsource it, right? So if you have coaches that come in and all of a sudden, I'm struggling at work, I'm considering leaving, but all of a sudden you gave me a coach that makes me feel like I'm growing, and makes me see things from a different perspective, makes me see value in what I do. You just outsource that, and you didn't have to create more time. It's
right.
coaching is one of the easiest solutions, but unfortunately, a lot of times it's being done also very rigidly. Here's the things we want you to cover. Here's this. Focus on
Mm,
work. Focus on these things. I'm like, well, what about their life? What about their health? What about other things that people care about? No, no, don't go there. That's not going to help our performance.
yeah,
Come on.
bring your package in and force it down everyone's throat well for us. And I'm being facetious. It's not effective. Mary makes comments, says education is crucial for learning to understand what we do in our lives. Thanks for teaching the value of an open mind for learning new things every day. We need constant development, indeed. And the sooner we get out of the same concept of rigidity and production. I mean, what education system has become is another manufacturing or production outfit. It's just trying to churn people through, and yeah, that works on some levels. I mean, we've proven it for building cars and things like that, but we're people, and we do production style. We find out that the production line doesn't put us out at the other end healthy and strong and ready to go. And in many cases, it breaks us in the process, forcing parts together that never should have been forced together to start with. Um, so, turnover, it is a challenge. Anton, one of the things as we were leading up to this that I thought about how that um, turnover creates more turnover. And I don't think, again, that we are connecting that relationship as we consider this. And part of the way turnover causes more turnover is when we have turnover, even handled the best possible, it creates stress. And we're already right on the verge of being overloaded stress, or at a minimum. Most of the time, we're already overloaded, and it just makes it worse. And the more turnover you have, the greater the stress, and so it feeds on itself. And part of what we've got to start thinking about is we say, well, we don't have time to stop and address it. There's a point where you can't afford the not taking the time to stop and address it, because the ultimate outcome is at some point you won't have a choice because it crashes and burns around you. Question is, do you get ahead of it, or do you wait till then and then see if you can survive and pick up the pieces?
Yeah, we got to wrap this one up. Looks like we're out of time. I just want to give
Oh,
people a
wow.
heads up. Next week we'll be talking about culture of accountability. We've had a lot of soft conversations and about soft skills and servant leadership, but Kevin and I also believe that that's not you can't just run a company that way. That as Kevin says all the time, manage things and lead people.
Mm.
Culture of accountability is a little bit going to be on the manage things side. So we'll be diving into that next week. I hope you guys join us and bring your amazing comments.
Let me share Robbie's comment. Conventional education is actually not helping all to overcome the current challenges faced by business as well as by individuals. Yeah, I think it's part of the problem in its general current state, Robbie. I tend to agree. Um, so next week, join us. We're going to deal with some of the other aspects of it, some of the balance. We're big on balance and perspective force, and accountability is necessary. Doesn't mean that you have to be a bad boss to be hold accountable people accountable. A good leader knows how to do it and do it well, but it's dependent on the culture being established well. Otherwise, accountability just becomes beating people over the head.
Mhm.
And So glad to have you guys. Hope you'll join us next Tuesday, 8 o'clock, same time, same location, either Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. We've got multiple channels. So if you know people that reside on those other platforms, let them know we'll be here. Love to have them join us. So take care and God bless everyone. And we will see you all next Tuesday, 8 o'clock Eastern. Thank you.